So guys, did you know that D&D is destroying America? Did you know that fantasy role-playing is ruining the entirety of the fabric of the states? Uniquely here. Other roleplay doesn't exist in other countries somehow. From Pine Tree, 2 coin Suris holding the squishy hammer Suris. Suris used to boop himself with in older streams, but now everything is green. How are there so many coin Suris? I'm just going to move on. The next one we have is from Asina, playing around with a slime Suris figure idea. Hope this works as it's my first time uploading. That actually is a very good hero forge, I'm not gonna lie. The last one we have is from Axo that has cream. So this is as close as I could get, trying to get Dali to make Suris. So we have various versions here. This one looks like it these look like Suris if I existed in Coraline. And then another prompt where these ones at least look a little closer. These look a little closer to what you would expect. But now these just look like what I've seen a lot of people using Dolly for, where they're just like, hey, I'm going to set up Dolly, and oh, look at this different outfit idea that I just got from it. That's what most of it seems to be. Like, almost all of these seem like really good outfits to use. As always, thank you all for your fan art submissions. If you want your fan art to be shown in a future episode, the best way to do so is to drop them in the fan art section of the Discord. With that said, if you haven't subscribed already, hit the like button and all that other fun stuff. Maybe even checked out the Patreon. Then please consider doing so, as all of those things help the channel out more than you could ever know. But speaking of the channel, we got to talk about, well, it's on a website called Christian Today, so I don't know what I would expect besides this, but we need to talk about how fantasy role-playing is hurting America. Not talking about how the Bible is just blurb in its own way, but you know, let's look at it. This is a piece that was apparently adapted from Russell Moore's newsletter. And what is that? Let's take a look here. Oh, from Why Are So Many Awful People in Leadership? Well, let's go ahead and look here real quick. They're just mad because Stranger Things made D&D even more popular. Yep. As a kid in the 1980s, I heard dire warnings from my evangelical elders about the fantasy role-playing game Dungeons and Dragons. It was, we were told, a foothold of the occult. Although I never played D&D, I didn't take these admonitions all that seriously because I reasoned that the same logic could be applied to Tolkien's Lord of the Rings or Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia. Now in the 2020s, I'm wondering if my evangelical elders weren't partly right about the way fantasy role-playing can paganize a culture. Just not in the way I expected. Paganize. Paganizing the culture. Paganizing it. Okay. That is certainly a way of describing what happens when people play D&D. I know a lot of pagans who play D&D, but I also know a lot of Christians who did not get paganized by playing D&D. Okay, sure. Let's continue on. In this month's Atlantic, Jennifer Senior explores a similar thought in relation to nationalist political strategist slash right-wing media personality Steve Bannon, who is currently indicted on charges of contempt of Congress regarding his alleged role in the January 6th insurrection. Putting aside what I think about Bannon himself, I was struck by one section of the article that explains much of what's happening in America right now. Senior points to a 2018 documentary in which Bannon explains to a filmmaker how, when working in the internet gaming industry, he was surprised to learn just how many people are devoted to playing multiplayer online games. Bannon interprets this intensity through the grid of a hypothetical man, Dave from accounts payable in the days after his death. Hold on a second. So, Steve Bannon was surprised people like playing games with each other? Really? Really? When you're working in the games industry, you are surprised that people like playing video games with other people. Human beings, the social species, who also engage in pattern recognition and constantly try to find the laziest approach to everything that we possibly can. It's surprising that multiplayer games... okay. Okay, sure, why not? Multiplayer games should be between two consenting adults. Let's go ahead and continue that real quick. Some preacher from a church or some guy from a funeral home who's never met him does a 10-minute eulogy, says a few prayers, and that's Dave, Bannon says. He contrasts this boring real-life Days from accounts payable with Dave's online gaming persona, Ajax. Ajax is tough and warlike. When he dies in the fantasy, there's a funeral pyre and thousands of people come out to mourn Ajax, the warrior. No. I'm sorry. But when you are when you're a character in a video game and you die, do you know what happens? The priest reses you. That's all that happens. The priest resurrects you. Or you respawn. Or you turn into a ghost. Or what have you. That's all. You die in your fantasy game, somebody reses you 9 times out of 10. Now, funeral pyres, thousands of people coming out to mourn, most of that comes down to convenience. In a video game, multiple people can come out to do a single event way easier and way faster than if they are in real life. Because in real life, I've got to pay for gas, I got to pay for hotels, I got to pay for food. In an online game, all I got to do is dedicate, 30 minutes of my time? And then I've gone to the funeral. I've been on Moonguard in World of Warcraft. I have seen some pretty elaborate roleplay. When Steve Bannon goes on to this article and says, which one is more real? Dave from accounting or Ajax? Bannon realizes that some people, particularly disaffected men, actively prefer and better identify with the online versions of themselves. I would say that most people better identify with the online versions of themselves. And this doesn't just go for fantasy, like roleplay. This is all forms of online everything. The username you choose, the version of yourself that you put on Facebook is not the same person you are in real life. Think about it. You don't put all of the negative things that happen in your real life on Facebook. Usually you put on the happy memories, the grand events, the trips you took with your spouse. Those are the things you throw on Facebook. Those are the things, like on Twitter, we might be getting a more angry version of you, but that is still a variant of you. It's not the real you. The you on Facebook, the you on Twitter, the you on anything. These are all yous that have been spliced through a filter. None of these are truly you. But you may prefer the version of yourself that comes across in any one of these platforms. And the reason I'm using those platforms instead of just utilizing, say, a video game is I think it undermines what point the article is trying to say. The article wants to go on and talk about how we use fantasy role-playing in terms of D&D and video games as the escape route here, but I think that's just the internet in general. The entirety of the internet uses these types of escapes, these types of mannerisms, these types of names and identities that we put on ourselves. This is just a normal part of existing online. You don't have to make more out of it than it is, but apparently Christian Today would like to. Let's go ahead and continue here. Bannon tapped into this, Senior reports, when he acquired Breitbart News and realized that the comment section could become more of a community for certain angry, lonely individuals than the town they live in, or the old bowling league. He noted that the comment section could be weaponized at some point in time. The angry voices, properly directed, have latent political power. Senior asks whether Bannon considers what he has done in propagating political media and in energizing populist nationalist websites and movements to be the gamification of politics. He replies that this is exactly what he's doing. I want Dave in accounting to be Ajax in his life. Now, note, this is very different. This is very different than talking about video games or talking about role play. This is predatory in its very nature. It's not necessarily predatory to just give people an out, give people an escapist type of thing that they can utilize, but it is predatory when you recognize that they are craving that escapism and then you weaponize them as a result. Ben and the bona fide parasite, yep. Senior argues that January 6th is the distillation of this role-playing fantasy. The angry, howling hordes arrive as real-life avatars cosplaying the role of rebels in face paint and fur. They storm the Capitol while an enemy tried to beat them away. This is hardly new and isn't limited in to any one point on the ideological spectrum. Almost every red diaper baby account about what drew their American parents or grandparents to the Communist Party during the Depression or post-World War II era includes something along the lines of how David Harauzis describes his parents' neighborhood Communist Party cell meetings in their basement. Oh, really? Let's read it. It was in this subterranean activity that the romanticism of their youth finally got to express itself. Here, they lived outside the norms of other mortals, breathed the intoxicating air of a world of revolution, and plotted their impossible dreams. In the cell, they were given secret names for the day when the party would go underground and the illegal business of the revolution would begin, as they all believed it would. Okay, what the fuck does that have to do with D&D? That sounds more like church than D&D, honestly. And that's coming from somebody who plays a paladin mostly in D&D. So church and D&D tend to get very mixed when I roleplay. In such meetings, these communists were not school teachers or long horsemen or electricians or lawyers. They were, in their own mind, underground fighters for a socialist utopia to come. And of course, while these American communists play acted as Soviet James Bonds, the Soviet Union was murdering and starving its own people to death. Can we get a... Can we come to an understanding here that communism as a concept and communism as it existed in the Soviet Union are not necessarily one and the same thing? For one, most of the numbers about the death toll of communism in the fucking Black Book are over-exaggerated. We've gone over that in a video we did on talking about Shadiversity. But also, on top of that, if we're talking about communism, we're talking about an economic system in which there's no government, there's no class, typically supposed to be a classless, moneyless society where everybody has equal shit. A classless, moneyless society with hierarchies taken out as best it can be is not really an accurate reflection of what we saw in the Soviet Union. So wait, Shadiversity, what did he do? He's been going on a bunch of anti-left-wing rants on his podcast. There may have been stylings of communism and communist rhetoric in the way that it manifested itself in the Soviet Union, but bear in mind that even the Nazis began as the National Socialist Party. The mere fact that the name is there, stamped on that movement or stamped on that country, does not mean that that's what's actually happening. Think about it. If the Nazis were actually socialists, why were they some of the first people to privatize many of their industries and hand it over to the capitalists? It doesn't make much sense when you actually look at how these economic systems are supposed to function. So communism as a stateless, classless, moneyless society doesn't really reflect what we see in the Soviet Union. So when you say something about these people think they're fighters, these communists think they're fighters for a socialist utopia, one, we're not talking about the same thing. Communism's a moneyless, classless, stateless society, but socialism just means that the proletariat owns the means of production. You still have money and markets, and you still have a lot of the same shit you have right now. It's just whether or not we let capital owners control the factories or control the major corporations, or we have them more democratically owned from the inside. That's the only fucking difference. So when you try to go on this rant about socialists being communist and then also bring in the Soviet Union, we're comparing apples, oranges, and grapes. All of them. Because what the Soviet Union was, it's very hard to accurately pin down as communism. And what communism is not what socialism is. But let's go ahead and continue the article in its awkwardness. According to Senior, Bannon's strategy for turning Dave from accounting culture into an Ajax culture is to sow doubts about every situation. Leaning on the Neil Howe and William Strauss fourth turning thesis, Bannon believed an unraveling is necessary for rejuvenation. The plan is to leave a smoldering cradle where our institutions once were. The institutions are indeed smoldering and cratering. Polls show shockingly high numbers of Americans seriously contemplating secession or political violence. Countless churches and denominations are either tearing apart or already torn. And in most of these institutions in crisis, the comment sections come alive to dwell among us. When the angriest, most destructive people don't get their way, they still exercise power by setting the agenda of conversation. So can we talk about that whole paragraph for a moment? There's a thing that I don't think is being acknowledged here. The common denominator doesn't seem to be games. The common denominator doesn't seem to be role-playing or fantasy. The common denominator is a public forum. That's all. Think about it. The common denominator here has all just been, this is how people are saying this on the internet. This is how people are saying this on Breitbart. This is how people are saying this in public forums. Unregulated public forums? That's what this is talking about. And if we're just talking about that, then maybe we're talking about something we can agree on, but I don't think we are, and I don't think we can. So they take issue with public forums? It's hard to say. Because again, they're trying to talk about this in terms of like communists and games and shit like that, but the reality is what they're talking about is just a comment section. That's it. A fucking comment section. But let's not forget for a moment the institutions themselves, whether the Republic or the congregation or anything else. Let's consider the individuals themselves. Spend time with the person raging on social media or at the microphone at the church business meeting, and you will often find the very same dynamic Bannon identified, that Dave from Accounts Payable wants to be Ajax. Yes, most people who happen to be in positions where they feel like they are unheard or feel like they do not have a lot of power tend to want to be heard more and have more power. That's kind of how these things tend to work. Maybe I'm just used to being on the internet, but yeah, people... It's less that people want to be their fantasy selves and more that there's an ideal self that we put forward to the world that we wish we were more like. Catherine Mooney, thank you for redeeming your points for an... You fucking degenerate. Veronica says, Shad is trying to blame politics for folks getting tired of his arrogance. Yeah, it's almost like his shitty politics are why people are tired of him being arrogant about his shitty politics. Weird, that. Dark Wolf, thank you very much for redeeming your points for an owl. Says here, this can happen within various populist political movements, which are Bannon's primary interest, but it also happens almost everywhere else. People are looking for meaning, significance, and bigger storylines in which to belong, and finding them in the very things that are bringing down institution after institution. It turns out actual fantasy role-playing, whether it be Dungeons & Dragons in a treehouse years ago or multiplayer video games on a screen, is, for most people, harmless fun. But maybe the church elders had a point. Maybe there's another form of fantasy role-playing that might be occultic and pagan in the truest sense of the words. I have never read a set of words that I've wanted to agree with the meaning of so much, while also disagreeing with every fucking word that has been said. What's being described here is the want for many people on the right wing to LARP out their fantasies of taking back, taking back our country's institutions. And yeah, there's certainly some truth to that. There's certainly a lot of truth to that. But the language here, talking about games and communism and now paganism, why? What are we doing here? What seems to be happening is there's an enemy that the writer has, paganism, what have you, and they want to lump people into that box. If they can't keep them in the Christian box, they have to put them in a box that makes more sense that they would be enemies in. But let's take a look here. Paganism, after all, demands the sort of significance that is heroic, in which one's virtue of strength and power are celebrated in story and song. Joseph Campbell infamously popularized Jung's idea of the hero's journey a half-century ago. But is that really Jung's idea? Pretty sure the hero's journey is much older than Jung, but anyways. But the quest for an imagined heroism is stronger now, and often much darker. Part of the problem with the moniker Dave from Accounts Payable lies in its description of where he works. In an age where one's worth is often subconsciously attributed to one's income and education or position or social capital, can we really be surprised that Dave would seek some way to be known, loved, and seen? And if he can't do that as Dave, is it any surprise he would try to be someone else? C.S. Lewis thought that paganism was a better place to start with in proclaiming meaning than arid secularism. He pointed out that the myths of paganism at least acknowledge a reality beyond the material. But what happens when we discover a kind of synecticism that mixes a pagan sense of meaning with a secular loss of hope, all while thinking itself to be Christian? Okay, so there's a common thread here, and I've already noted the common thread is the need to have an enemy and then calling the enemy paganism and then lumping everything into that idea of paganism. But is it any actual, is there any confusion as to why a group of Christians that believe that the country is being taken over by satanic powers that want to consume blood of children, potentially, depending on how far into the QAnon movement they are. Is there any actual confusion as to why that group of people might engage in some kind of violence? How's it going, Left to Sal? That his night watch kind of screwed him? Jesus. Saying all of these things are necessarily anti-Christian, saying all of these things are necessarily pagan, saying all these things are necessarily one thing or the other, it kind of ignores it ignores the real common denominator. These things are human. These are human things. In general, humans want to be part of a larger social group, want to be part of a larger narrative. Lumping those things in with paganism specifically seems to miss the point. Because arguing that, oh, well, they wanted to do this, that's paganism, whilst thinking itself Christianity, is ignoring the fact that Christianity tends to do the same thing. I mean, after all, are you really avoiding trying to be part of something larger when you are literally part of one of the largest religions in the entire world? Feels kind of awkward to me. But let's go ahead and take a look here. Yet the way of Jesus is quite different. A Christian vision of heaven is not Valhalla with wine instead of mead. Valhalla, and almost every other pagan vision of the afterlife, looks backwards. It's an echo and celebration of the warrior's success in a life that was. That also feels inaccurate. Rovlern, thank you very much for the subscription. Okay, this is where I wish I had Ocean on right now, because this feels like it's ignoring the fact that paganism does not rely on Valhalla. That's weird. That's not how that works. Valhalla is an idea of afterlife that exists in a sect of paganism, but that is not all paganism. This seems like a person writing an article where they watched a handful of movies, like they watched the show Vikings or some shit, or they watched a handful of movies that had paganism as a concept in it, and then they went, I understand that. I understand the entirety of that. Says here, the kingdom of God doesn't find meaning there. It brings meaning by joining our stories with an altogether different narrative, the story of Jesus. His life is our life. His story is our story. Him getting nailed to a cross by a bunch of Romans is us getting nailed to a cross by a bunch of Romans. And then getting pierced by them, penetrated by them. I hear you was well hung, though. So, I mean, you got that going for you. When we start to really understand and embody that in our churches, maybe fewer Daves will find their identities in either accounts payable or Ajax Online. Maybe more of them will find that there's glory in the ordinary, in giving your life away for the people you love. Maybe more people will see that there's indeed a cloud of witnesses all around, but that we don't need them to cheer for us. We need them to bear witness alongside us. Okay, now it's just a spiel for church. Now it's just a spiel for church. That's what this turned into. This started as something communism, something D&D, something Steve Bannon, and then it ended on repent because that is a good thing. Okay, that's as far as I need to go. That's as far as I needed to go. Give your life away to the people you love because we're definitely not a death cult. That ended in nothing. Yeah, this feels like drunk rambling. This feels like a super self-contradictory article written by somebody who didn't have the time to proofread what they put in the first couple paragraphs before they got to the last couple paragraphs. Yeah, it's a giant nothing burger. We spent this whole time on a giant nothing burger. I wanted there to be talk about dragons. I wanted more talk about D&D. Instead, I got nothing. I got nothing. And I don't know how to feel about that. I don't like getting nothing. I have been blue-balled by this article. This article owes me a handy under the table. But that's as far as we're going to get there. Maybe you pulled something different out of that than I did. The only thing I pulled out of that was nothing. Nothing at all. I got nothing. They mentioned trolls. Bantam was there. Yeah. Roll for initiative. First person gets to comment in the comment section. We didn't even get a bard trying to seduce somebody. No, we didn't. We didn't get any of the interesting things in D&D. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below when this goes up on YouTube. Hit the like button if you haven't already. Let me know if you pulled anything more out of this than I did. Check out the Patreon if you haven't already. And as always, everyone, insert end of video tagline here.